Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 845. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. The SPaMCAST 845 features our interview with David Minarsch. We discussed AI, co-owned AI, multi-agent systems in complex environments, and governance. These are singly the most important technical topics for the new year. If you are in the business, you need to listen carefully to David's perspective on agents. David Minarsch is a distinguished expert in the fields of applied game theory and multi-agent systems, holding a Ph.D. from the University of Cambridge. His groundbreaking work includes the creation of the first multi-agent system framework with native support for distributed ledger technologies. As the co-founder and CEO of Valory, David has been at the forefront of integrating AI and blockchain technology since 2021. Pioneering the development of open source and user-owned autonomous agents. David has established himself as a visionary leader in the tech industry, most notably by his latest venture, Valory, which is a co-creator of OLAS, the platform for co-owning AIs, which has generated swarms of AI agents making over 900,000 transactions. David's mission through Valory is to enable communities, organizations, and countries to co-own AI systems, beginning with decentralized autonomous agents. His innovative work continues to shape the future of AI and blockchain integration, paving the way for a more democratic and accessible artificial intelligence. Are you ready to talk AI and co-owned AI? It's time for the conversation. David Minarsch, founder and CEO of Valory. Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Hey, thanks for having me. Looking forward.
I am too. This is the whole idea of agents, AI, the whole co-owned, all of this stuff is pretty cutting edge for a lot of people. But since I've had a lot of conversations recently in the AI world, I like to start these discussions with something very basic and something that ended up not being very simple, and everybody has their own. But what is your definition of AI?
Yeah, good question. So I think it obviously shifts over time, and like generally speaking, right, it started with like these sort of rule-based AI systems, and then basically people were even like creating chatbots back then, and chatbots, and then it focused more on effectively learning-based systems like machine learning, where instead of writing the rules, we learn the rules from the data and write rules to learn rules from the data. And now we're in this sort of period where that's becoming very commonplace, and obviously neither rules-based or this kind of learning-based AI has gone away, and now we're, I think, really focused on agentic AI, or that's what everyone's kind of starting to focus on. So that's one way to look at it. And then I also think AI, when it becomes commonplace, we think of it as automation, right? And so there's this element where when AI becomes too commonplace, we stop calling it AI.
Interesting. Do you think it has become commonplace?
Well, in a sense, yeah. I mean, recommender systems, various like social product, all like and almost all software products have some form of AI systems, right, involved. And now we have like very like powerful products like the almost self-driving cars and self-driving cars with Waymo in San Francisco, and then like drones, robots on the software side, things like ChatGPT and large language models more generally starting to permeate the space. And so, like, if you could go back a few years, a lot of those products weren't mature, and there were other kinds of AI products which people would like kind of put the focus on. And I think the same thing will happen again in a few years. So that's how I feel about it. It's like it's a moving target.
Well, it is a dynamic marketplace. Because it's so dynamic and it's well, it's getting used. Well, as you went through a laundry list of different applications of AI, what impact do you see it having on society today?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the sort of, again, helpful to categorize. Like, there's the more sort of augmentation kind of use cases and the more autonomous kind of use cases. And I think today, most of the application are still in the augmentation side of things. And there, by definition, they sort of augment what humans can do. So often it's about productivity enhancing products or software which sits inside of products, sort of enabling more efficient workflows, right? And so sometimes this means like, humans lose a job as a result because you need less employees, but sometimes it also just means that everyone at a job becomes more productive, the business makes more money, and as a result, everyone's better off. So I think on the augmentation side, there's definitely these sort of different impacts we can see. On the autonomy side, I think there's a risk for it to become much more negative effect for a lot of people, because when we think about autonomous products like self-driving cars, drones, autonomous software agents that do things on our behalf, it's very feasible for them to replace large numbers of, let's say, human workers in certain domains, like taxi drivers, cab drivers, Uber drivers, or be it in the workplace. You can see that maybe in the legal profession, like certain roles like lower down the food chain will just shrink in terms of numbers because people will use software agents to prep the deal terms and then the partner looks over it or something like that. In the medical field, we'll see that, but it probably will take a bit longer because it's much more tightly regulated. So I do think there's this larger risk from these sort of more autonomous products to really quite negatively from the perspective of some and very positively from the perspective of other affect the marketplace. I make it even more bifurcated, where you effectively have some winners that are absolutely massive and you have a lot of losers. And so for me, a lot of the question with as we're going from these sort of learning-based AI systems that mostly affected the augmentation kind of use cases towards these sort of more autonomous robots, autonomous agents, autonomous software systems that kind of complement our life. How can we do that in a way where sort of all of society wins and not just some of society, right?
I think that's sort of an interesting conundrum because I don't think it'll end up being everybody wins. I don't think there are probably that many win-win scenarios. Hopefully there are.
We don't know. And I think there's also agency everyone has, right? So if you think about what makes robust economies like the US and others so strong, it's because there's a tremendous amount of competition. And there's tremendous amount of growth which results from that competition. If you look at economies that stagnate, it's those where it becomes very sort of either centralized decision making or where it is basically oligopolies or monopolies that kind of totally define markets. There's very little competition. And I think the real challenge with AI as we're going from where we're now to it really fundamentally changing how societies work is that we stay in this kind of competitive environment where a lot of businesses and people have the chance to utilize these things and not having to effectively rent these systems from 2 or 3 central providers, let's say OpenAI, Google, and one more, right? I think that's the big challenge.
Well, I think that takes me to, there are 2 angles that I'd like to tug on, 2 threads here. One is you use the term autonomous. Again, my listeners a lot of them are developers, probably understand that, but a lot of them are probably just starting their career in the development world and may not have heard that term used before. What is an autonomous? Well, what's an autonomous agent?
Yeah, it's actually a tricky question because there's even within that multiple definitions. But let's try to pick it apart. So one way to think about it is it's a software system. You give a goal, and then it has a certain freedom and independence in kind of working towards that goal. And ideally, it's sort of capable of working towards that goal without your immediate input, right? So take an example like a self-driving car. You give it the goal to go to a certain destination, and then you kind of sit back and relax whilst the system figures out like all the intricacies of actually getting there. What other people might define as an autonomous agent is almost like something like a software being. And they're actually two very different things. So you could imagine like a separate system, which is sort of a robot. Like for those who watched iRobot, you have this transition from this robot that's a product that serves me to the robot that's effectively like a human. It has its own feeling, it has its own aims, and it changes these aims. And that's no longer a product. That's like a being which will probably ask for rights, and it's a very different quality of autonomous agent. It is actually independent fully, right? You're not just delegating some tasks to it and then it will yield back control to it. It'll just stay independent. And those two things are very different, but actually the technologies probably, as we go through time between them, will sort of overlap quite a lot. And so for me, it's very important to make that distinction, because what I think we want today are basically the products where we are able to delegate certain tasks, certain goals to an agent that executes that somewhat independently from us and then yields back control to us. I think there's maybe people who are excited about like this kind of software beings that have their own mind, but obviously that takes us into a radically different sphere altogether.
I think you could almost paint that on sort of a trend line and say you have over here that agent that can make up its own mind, which I think would be a tad bit scary, and the fully the ones that you give it a goal, but there are probably some that can change their goals as they go within a certain set of parameters and make a different goal decision. When we get to scenarios where there are multiple agents all interacting, how does one actually make that work in an environment?
Yeah. So I think like, to be clear, going forward, I'll stick to the autonomous agents that are products. In that context, we as the users want these systems to do things on our behalf. And so the field of like studying like autonomous agent societies or multiple autonomous agents is called multi-agent systems, and that's actually been a subfield of AI for a long time. So this is not nothing new, but what the capabilities of these agents are has really fundamentally changed with the arrival of large language models and since then further improvements. So historically, often people would have very hard-coded rules of effectively engagement between these agents. So these would be sort of protocols. You can think of them like the internet has certain protocols like TCP and HTTP, and the whole kind of application stack of different kind of protocols at different levels. People would come up with agent-to-agent communication protocols. I certainly was involved in researching some of them in the past and publishing some. But I think what's exciting now is that because these software agents become more capable, these protocols can become less structured, right? So as long as you have some sort of open communication channel, be that via like existing like network protocols like TCP or whatever, or even be it via like, as long as you have some sort of channel, these agents can communicate with each other in unstructured ways, right? And that makes it much more open-ended what's possible today than, let's say, a few years ago. And so then the question is like, if you think of these agents as products, what are interesting problems here? Like one is to basically have these agents be coordinated and sort of be able to find each other and kind of offer services to each other. And that's certainly something we're very interested in at Valory. And let me zoom out there a bit. Why even like multi-agent systems? If we come back to how we started the podcast, I think it's, for me, very important to think, okay, but how can we build systems where we retain like competitiveness in the marketplace. And for me, the best way to create that is if a lot of agents, be it human agents or software agents, have access to basically the cutting edge technology and can sort of then compete with each other. And so the way we at Valory think about the future is like we should create the ability that as many businesses and people can own agents that act as products for them, that do valuable things for them, be it around, the three big categories like health, wealth, well-being, right? That's the kind of things we care about. And so if that is so, then naturally, let's say we're in this world where we have a couple of agents, you and I, doing things on our behalf. These agents will not be generalists. They won't be good at everything, right? The same way that humans aren't good at everything. Maybe in theory, you could be good at everything, but at some point you have to make a trade-off, right? You can only spend your time in one area at any given time. Same thing applies to software agents. Obviously, they're faster, but still the same thing applies. And so then agents tend to specialize. And so the moment agents tend to specialize, they at some point need other agents to get stuff done, other software systems to get stuff done, other humans to get stuff done. And that's where the multi-agent system sort of just naturally arises, right? So if I have a software agent that acts on my behalf, it won't be good at everything, and I will need to rely on other systems and services. The same way I, as an economic actor in the economy at large, go out, buy my food, then work on the computer on what I'm good at, and then procure the services of someone else. So multi-agent system with software agents is something which just naturally arises. And then the question is like sort of how can these agents find each other? How can they communicate, etc.?
So that is, I guess, the billion-dollar question. How would, arguably, right, if everybody can build agents and get them someplace, how then would they interact? How would, who would own that backbone of communication, or even just, qualify them to get in there?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And I think the answer again, is let's think with the end in mind. There's the kind of what do I want, and also what organically might happen. I think what I definitely want is a world where agents compete because it creates better outcomes, as we argued before. And then the other thing is specifically with agentic software systems, ultimately they specialize and they rely on some sort of local context to get stuff done. Like that can be like private information to me as the user of the agent, or it can literally be like my assets, which the agent leverages to get stuff done. So there's always a situation where we're already starting in a decentralized world and we're not all like in one place and all consuming the same information. So there's a natural pressure to have actually a more decentralized deployment of sort of agents to begin with. And then the way we can think about this is, okay, well, will there be the central agent hub, right? Let's kind of caricature, will AWS or Google or someone else offer this hub where all the agents register and then all trade on that one hub and sort of do one thing. And I think there will be such hubs, but I struggle to see that will be what will sort of be the equilibrium, what will arise out of all these agents interacting, for the reason that it's a couple of reasons. Firstly, again, because agents are so specialized in different areas, whenever someone offers a hub that is sort of centrally controlled, it will quickly become a bottleneck for experimentation and for all these unique cases. Even if you think of it from a software perspective, okay, some API is missing, someone needs to add it. Okay, that's technically solvable. The next problem you have, though, is you still need to get it there. So there's kind of a delay. The second problem is around regulatory. Let's say I'm in a different jurisdiction than you. Okay, now the centralized provider, right, needs to kind of coordinate all this. That becomes all blockers to growth. So the question is there an alternative way to do it? And our view is very much yes, and it's basically crypto rails. So rather than having that hub being something that is centralized, let's use actually the decentralized networks that already exist to allow agents to communicate and to allow agents to trade with each other. And the largest decentralized networks that exist are crypto networks, where you basically have global networks that anyone without permission can tap into and create the sort of APIs they need and consume the APIs they want. And that's what's happening today. So for instance, Valory, we're a contributor to this agent protocol called OLAS, and our agents can like permissionlessly be used, and they can tap into all these open crypto protocols that already exist. And if we don't like something of these protocols, we can just sort of deploy an additional API to make it better. In the same sense, anyone who wants to build on us can do that too. So it's a much more organic and faster way to grow like a network of agents than if you have one centralized hub where some person or some company needs to coordinate all these sort of things in one place.
We live in a world that is populated by nation states with all sorts of different views of what should or should not be possible within their economic spheres of control. How would an open network like that, and crypto does struggle with that, I think, to some extent, but how would a network like that of agents actually deal with different nation state players?
Yeah, I think the exact same way we deal with it well, not the exact same way, but sort of by analogy, like how it happens with human agents. It's basically just because we have like one global rails on which, I can send you digital assets, doesn't mean that necessarily the receiver and the recipient, the sender and the receiver are necessarily ruled under the same set of laws, right? Like if I reside in a different country to you, then my tax laws apply. My regulation applies to me, and where you're residing applies to you. And so the same thing for a software agent. If obviously there's also a regulatory gap there at the moment where we'll see how that gets filled. But I presume that what we'll eventually find is, wherever the software agent resides, and by definition, who kind of instructed it, there will be some sort of connection there to the relevant jurisdiction. And so, like, one is the rails on which it travels, and the other one is the sort of rules that get applied on top. And I think that's an underappreciated fact of maybe crypto, is that whilst these base networks are sort of transnational and sort of cross jurisdictions, like when you are in any given jurisdictions, it's not lawless, right? Your set of laws apply to how you use that technology.
Co-owned AI. I'm struggling with the concept of co-owned AI. And given our conversation about autonomous agents, I think that makes a little bit more sense. Well, how does the idea of co-owned AI work, or does it support the idea of autonomous agents?
Yeah, so that takes us back to how we started the podcast. I think like the notion we have is that we will move to a future where everyone has multiple agents doing things on their behalf. Some of them will be of the nature where we rent them, like a SaaS platform, right? I subscribe to it, and the product I'm subscribing ends up being an agent, and it does valuable things to me. But I struggle to see that the entire sort of economic might of all the countries on the planet, and this sliver of global GDP that will ultimately be facilitated by agents, which I'm thinking is a significant sliver of the services GDP, that all that will basically go via 3, 4, 5 centralized companies where we are renting that from and paying basically our dues. What I think will happen is that will be a mixture between that and what we saw with Linux, and the fact that open source sort of frameworks get used for people to build businesses where they can extract the full value of the value chain, right, that they occupy. And so what this means is people will want to own their agents. Businesses want to own their agents outright and not rely on some centralized provider where they pay a 15-20% tax for everything that agent does, tax here, because they're basically needing to pay that subscription fee. So I'm fundamentally convinced that will happen. Like the open source community will make sure of it, and the economic incentives will make sure of it. And that's what we refer to as co-owned AI. It's like I can either outright own my agent, or as a business or a group of people in an organization, or as a consortium of businesses, I can jointly own agents, like I can jointly own ventures, and kind of basically derive economic value from them.
If you were to give advice to someone who was, getting into the AI field with the idea of of, becoming an entrepreneur like you, don't you think not only do you have to have a technical background, but I would argue that you sound like you have a good understanding of, both macro and microeconomics.
Well, I do because I'm a trained economist, but I don't think that I think that's actually, it does help with multi-agent systems, because multi-agent systems are as much economic systems as they are software systems. So if you just build the best software, that doesn't necessarily mean your system will do particularly well, because it's also about incentives, and it's about like arranging, the incentives between these agents, and kind of thinking about like this as an economic problem, as a game theory problem sometimes. And so it's helpful, but like anything, I think like people can specialize, right? And like we said before, agents are specializing, people can specialize. I think what we'll see, and we're already seeing this to a degree, is that what agents enable, and particularly agents where I can own the full stack, is that you can build businesses that are agents. So you can have a new form of creator movement, which is already in swing, where people are creating agents that do very specific things. They might be influencers, right? Like the same way that humans are influencers. They might be traders. They might be information brokers, right? They might be like researchers. So they might literally manage your set of assets, maybe a bunch of Airbnb flats you're renting out. And I think like there's different levels where people can come in. They can come in at the more sort of creator level, and then maybe share, come as a no-code kind of platform, which requires them to share some of their gains, or kind of go lower down in the stack and have it outright. Certainly at Valory, with us, what we're trying to do is give people agents that they can fully own. And this really is facilitated by an open protocol, where ultimately the protocol benefits from coordinating those agents. So rather than relying on basically renting you your agent and saying, okay, here's your agent, but now you have to pay a fee to me all the time, it's more like, okay, here's your agent, you can have it. But if your agent kind of coordinates with other agents, and we're facilitating that via the protocol, then we'll take a small fee.
Sounds like the interchange network on MasterCard and Visa to some extent.
I think it's, in a way, it's a search and discovery mechanism and marketplace for agents. Yeah.
As a founder, and one last question before we start to wrap, and this one's a little different angle. As a founder who has, I would suggest, or at least my understanding, is a fairly distinct technical bias, how does one shift from being a sort of a technical leader into more of a business and thought leader within an organization?
It's a great question. So for me, it's been always like, it's been an interesting journey, because agents, we started agents like over 5 years ago. And as I say, multi-agent systems around for decades, but really agents have only taken off in the last 2 years. And so there's been like an interesting shift to see like all the different perspectives people take and have on agents, and what that means for the kind of businesses they're building. Sometimes it's sort of a bit annoying, like to see that like ideas and sort of concepts you had already out as products at the wrong point in time, sort of basically later get slightly repackaged, often in a worse way, and find more kind of attention, right? But I think that's exactly where ultimately we want to go with this. I mean, that's sort of also kind of the notion behind what we are trying to enable, which is like a wealth of agents. So for me, it's an ongoing process to be like, okay, well, there's these technical things we're enabling, and the sort of long-term vision we have, which is to give as many people as possible an agent that they can fully own, that does valuable things for them. And at the same time, communicate that in a way where people are currently at with their understanding of agents. And I think, for me, that's an ongoing challenge, because like, obviously I think about agents every day, but then people have their initial touch points with agents that are very diverse, and they're very anchored to these initial experiences. So for some people, what an agent is basically augmentation, like ChatGPT. For other people, they have actually experienced more autonomous agents. And whatever first application, maybe an influencer agent, they get very anchored to that, or an agent that can be their sort of brand online. So I feel like people tend to be very driven by their initial product experience and how they define agents. And I'm very driven by like just the general concept of agents, which I see everywhere because humans are agents and then there's the software agents. And so sometimes it's more about like, okay, we build these things that enable this agent coordination at scale. And then how can we pick up a consumer where they are today and give them the sort of products that they want today to connect that to that larger vision. And we have made some successes there. So one of our largest products is effectively one where agents act on your behalf in a financial context, prediction markets and trading in crypto. And there we definitely tapping into some user segment that kind of understands and values that. Had over millions of transactions from these agents to date. But then on the other end of the spectrum, for instance, these influencer agents caught us a bit off guard, and they actually currently very much on the rise, where people have these agents that they give a persona, and then that persona kind of gets acted out in some social channels. We're now kind of trying to understand, okay, what is this, and how can we kind of speak to that crowd? So yeah, it's an ongoing challenge.
Well, that's again, that's the fun part of living in a dynamic world. David, if you woke up tomorrow morning, someone handed you your morning caffeinated beverage of choice and a magic wand and said you had 2 wishes that could change how multi-agent AI systems live. There, I'm actually making them people now. Live, work, and prosper in the world around us. What would those 2 wishes be and why?
Yeah, I hope that we can, one, get the sort of capabilities which very large models currently offer into much, much smaller models, because agents are effectively on a software level the systems that have models inside and some sort of architecture around it. And so you're very much your capabilities are very much constrained by the kind of quality of your model. In an ideal world, I would say, Ginny, give me like quite small models that consumers can have on their local devices that are as capable as some of those centralized models which we're all used to now. I think we're getting there slowly, and obviously there will always be a gap, but the question is like, will these small models be good enough for what users need for those products? And I think we're getting there. And the other thing I would say is that, yeah, there's a lot of builders in agents which currently build SaaS products that I think are extremely lame. And I think it's because we're very indexed as builders, particularly if you're like sort of in the more typical Silicon Valley sort of mind space, that we should be building these sort of interactive experiences. I think like that was triggered with like the social apps. Like if you talk to like your average builder on the street, and average here not meaning as in bad builder, but just sort of you pick one out of the great builders, they'll be building an interactive experience. And it's actually kind of strange because with agents, you can build fully autonomous experiences. And that fundamentally changes everything. Because if I, as a user, I can only be in one place at one time. I can use one app, I can use another app, I can use 2 at the same time. And so if I have autonomous agents, I can have 10, hundreds, thousands ultimately do bidding on my behalf in different domains. So actually the scope of economic activity and therefore the markets you can tap into are significantly larger. And the experiences you can create are significantly more interesting. And I think more builders should really like question, okay, like when I'm building agents, am I actually like 10xing or am I really just creating like a SaaS platform under a different name? And I think that's boring.
I agree. Why has that revolution not happened?
I think because people actually like at large, I think a lot are still stuck in their understanding of what agents are. And I think there's very much these extremes where people either like an agent is a model and no, it's much more than that. And so it's not just interaction with that model. And then at the other extreme, they're like, oh, an agent is like my independent software entity that one day will ask for its own rights. And then they kind of jump into the world will go under, these things will take over, blah, 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 right? And it's sort of, I think the middle is where it's very interesting, right? It's like, if you think about autonomous cars, if you think about autonomous machines and robots, you think about the software equivalents thereof, that space, it's harder to reason about for builders because it requires a different mindset. I notice this with my engineers as well. Some are very good at thinking about autonomous systems. They think about sort of state machines, and they think about like what these agents might do and what different choices they have. And others really need that sort of immediate feedback. So when they're asked to code a system where sort of everything sort of happens sort of out of the direct interaction loop with, let's say, a browser or something, they start struggling to even like conceptualize what the system might be doing. And I think that's potentially, just there's different set of builders who need to come and experience and push some of those experiences.
David Minarsch, this has been absolutely marvelous. How would people, find out more about you, interact perhaps? How would they find out more about Valory?
Yeah, so our company is called Valory, so it's VALORY.xyz. You can find the site. The protocol with agents I talked about is called OLAS.network, so OLAS.network. That's actually where I would recommend people go. They can try out the agents we have there. And then the final thing, my Twitter handle would be, or X handle would be David_ENIM. And I post a lot there, and you can follow me.
Excellent. Thank you. This has been absolutely marvelous. Is there anything else you'd like to promote before we roll?
I just would push everyone to think in terms of autonomous experiences over interactive experience, like products that create valuable outcomes for humans that humans can control. So I invite everyone to participate.
Remember, the Software Process and Measurement Cast is brought to you by Mastering Work Intake, a book written by Jeremy Willits and myself. As the new year builds up steam, have you looked at your to-do list and said, oh my, or something else? I know I have. This is a symptom of a work intake issue. Whether you are reacting to your work or your personal backlog, it's time to learn to take control. Buy a copy of Mastering Work Intake, link in the show notes. Go over to Amazon or J. Ross Publishing. If you'd rather test the water before spending your year-end bonus, Jeremy Willits and I offer a free 30-minute office hour session. In these sessions, we facilitate helping to identify and create a plan to tackle one of your work intake challenges. Book time with us. Link in the show notes. We'll be happy to have a conversation. In Reread Saturday News, today we wrap up our reread of How to Be a Stoic by Massimo Pigalucci. There are several themes I'd like to highlight from our reread. The first, and perhaps the most important, is the impact of an exceptional bookstore. I picked up this book at Literary Bookstore in Ann Arbor, Michigan. But for that small bit of serendipity, my life would have been different. Support your local bookstore. If you don't have one, take an occasional road trip to go touch, smell, and sample physical books. The second theme is Epictetus's concept of the dichotomy of control, and then we proceed even deeper into Stoicism. Next week, we begin our reread of Development is Freedom by Amartya Sen. This reread will expand the horizons of the Reread Saturday a bit. You'll find the topic interesting and useful. Buy a copy, read along, link in the show notes. Remember, you can catch up to all of the entries in our reread over the multitude of years. In the show notes, we have a listing of all of the entries into How to Be a Stoic by Massimo Pigalucci. Dive in, buy a book, read along. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 846, we discuss the importance of efficiency. It's easy to prioritize outcomes and value over output and efficiency, but the logic is problematic. We'll also have a visit from Jeremy Berrio, the evolutionary agilist. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people say, "Are we there yet?"